eventually I got to the point, and like, I don't know exactly, when it was on the process, where I realized that I couldn't change what had happened, but I could change how I felt about what happened, and I could change the story I told about what happened, and I had complete control of what came next.
Back to another episode of the Beyond the Scale podcast. Today, I have the great opportunity to interview Stacy Copas, dubbed the Queen of Resilience by 7 times world surfing champion Layne Beachley, and a badass by the world's toughest man, David Goggins. Our guest today has not let a devastating accident that left her a quadriplegic and needing a wheelchair for life at 12 years old slow her down for a minute. Instead, she has used her life experience and personal philosophies to work with top organizations to help their overwhelmed leaders to be more engaged, productive, and resilient so that they can grow through uncertainty and change. She is the author of How to Be Resilient and has been featured by Financial Review, ABC Radio, and The Australian for her insights on resilience in the workplace. In her spare time, you're likely to find her in her nearest patch of sunshine with a book, recharging her solar powers. Today, Stacy will be sharing her inspiring story with us, filled with insights on how to be resilient in business and in life, and how just practicing gratitude can completely change your outlook on any adversity that comes your way. Stacy, welcome to the Beyond the Scale podcast. I'm so happy to be sitting here with you, and good morning to you over in Australia.
And good afternoon to you. It's great. I know we've had a few attempts at getting together for this, and I think this is our 3rd time lucky. So I'm really excited about our chat today.
Yeah. So for our listeners, Stacy and I were connected through Bryce, the CEO of Fit Body Bootcamp. Bryce and Stacy have done a little bit of work together, and I had the great fortune of just like learning more about her and her journey. And you have overcome so many things in your short lifetime. And so I want to have our listeners learn a little bit about like your story when, growing up and what happened in the accident, and then walk us through, where you are today.
Yeah, thank you. So as a young person, I was probably a little bit unique in that I was pretty driven and motivated, and from a really young age, I was pretty clear on what I wanted to do with my life. So from the time I even started my earliest school, then all I wanted to do was just be a vet. So everything I did around, my school stuff was just on that single focus. And aside from that, I was a pretty talented athlete from a young age. And I was the pitcher in the softball team in the summer. And I ended up being a good friend and I ended up being the first 2 girls to ever play soccer for our school. So this was back in, like, taking you back now, aging myself, 1989, 1990. So, it was a very long time ago, and it's obviously women's sport has come a long way since then, being the first 2 girls to play soccer, which, wasn't very popular with the boys. But again, there's always going to be someone that's going to be the first. And aside from that, I was a really good runner, and I was pretty obsessed with running. It's like everywhere I went, I ran. And I had represented my school at every distance from the 100 meters right through to the cross country. So athletically, I was doing so well. Academically, at this point, I was at the end of my primary schooling, so I was 12 years old. And so I'm guessing that's kind of middle school sort of thing in the US. And so that was where we sort of made our decisions about what was the next school we were going to go to. And so I'd always wanting to be a vet. Then there was a school not far from where I lived that was an agricultural specialty. And it was a competitive academic process to get into that school. And I actually got in on the first round. And so, so everything was going so well. I had really good friends. My family was pretty normal. So I felt like I was well on track with everything that I'd set myself to do. But unfortunately, all of those plans got completely turned upside down. It was the first weekend in summer, and I was visiting a relative's place with my younger brother, who was 10 at the time. And we were cooling off in their backyard pool, and it was somewhere that we'd visited quite a lot. And I was the only girl there. There was a few other boys that were younger than my brother. So I did what I did every time I visited there. And I like to just climb up onto the edge of the pool and dive in. Now, it was one of those pools that's above the ground and it wasn't very deep. So it definitely wasn't built for diving. So I was getting yelled at to stop. But I'm sure you remember what it was like to be 12 and feeling that bulletproof and invincible. So I completely ignored that. But the one particular time I was standing there on the edge, and I'd been thinking that I was splashing too much when I was diving in. So I stood there for a moment and I was thinking, how could I make a perfect dive? And so after a bit, I thought, okay, what if I was to hold my feet together and keep my legs straight? I thought, in theory, I thought that would make a nice, clean entry into the water. So I took a deep breath and I did exactly that. And at the time, it felt like any of the other dives that I'd taken before, until I went to try and swim up to the surface and I found I couldn't move. So I was completely conscious. I didn't feel any pain. I didn't feel like anything had gone wrong, but I could not move. So I was holding my breath. Panic set in very, very quickly, desperately trying to get my attention of my brother to help me, which I couldn't do. So I held my breath for as long as I could. But then when I couldn't hold it any longer, I had to just give in. And so that panic just turned into a moment of just sheer terror as I breathed in. And as my lungs filled with water, I blacked out. And it was a little bit after that the others realized something had gone wrong, because at the time they just thought I was mucking around and like they're kids. So, you can't blame them for that. So eventually they, raised the alarm for help, and it was three different hospitals I got taken to over the course of that afternoon and evening. And it was at the third hospital in intensive care that a doctor had come and told me that I'd actually broken my neck and drowned and that I'd never walk again. So for somebody that was so driven and motivated and all I wanted to do was be a vet, I was an athlete, I was all of those things, like it felt like a death sentence to me to think that I was never going to be able to do any of those things. I couldn't, I wasn't going to walk again, let alone be able to do all the things that were so important to me. I spent 7 months in hospital, the first 8 weeks of that flat on my back, staring at a ceiling with sandbags either side of my head. And, majority of that 8 weeks was just mourning all of those things that I wasn't going to be able to do anymore. I was devastated that I couldn't be a vet. I was so angry that I was never going to be, able to play the sports that I was so good at. And being a 12-year-old girl, I was just so upset thinking that boys would never be interested in me again. For years and years afterwards, I was in this really deep, dark place, but I was really good at the nothing to see here, getting on with life, don't ask me any questions.
Yeah.
And I, like a lot of teenagers, my outlet was getting drunk and getting stoned. And that just led to, I looked like they were like moments of artificial happiness, but then the pits got deeper. And it was a few years ago when I was reflecting back on all of this that I realized that, while physically I had drowned once, emotionally I was drowning every single day. So, that was, a massive, massive hit to me, my family, my future, everything that I saw myself as and everything I wanted to do, like that was gone. And so, it was many, many years, in the dark of just being angry and bitter and resentful at myself for, what I'd done that had changed everything I thought I was going to be.
Yeah. That is just at 12 years old. It's like I can't wrap my head around your emotional state at that time, because you didn't have the life experience to say, or the knowledge to even talk yourself through that moment. Like, okay, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to overcome this obstacle. Like at that time, your worries were just so different than that of an adult. Like you weren't even an adult yet. Like you were just worried about, like you said, studying to be a vet, playing sports, would boys like you? Like just all of those fears that you had at that time. They're juvenile fears, and they're fears because you were so young. It's like you didn't even know like what the trajectory of your life looked like, and you probably couldn't even wrap your mind around that. I mean, it's just it's incredible that you were able to overcome those days. Though, talk about what you said it was your younger brother that was there with you when it happened. Talk about the support from your family and how you felt from them, and just like how were they there for you in that moment, or what was that like?
Yeah, it was on that day that the accident actually happened. My parents weren't even there, so my dad.
Oh,
My
wow.
dad was actually he was playing. He played indoor cricket, and so he was playing his grand final that day. And we had the option of, do we go and watch Dad play cricket? Like, no thanks. Or on a hot day, do we go to our cousin's place and have a swim?
Yeah.
So that was, of course, they got like an emergency call, and back then no mobile phones or anything like that either. So they got an emergency call, and so my mum ended up meeting me at the first hospital, and so she spent a lot of that time with me, and for a first big chunk of the time, then I had either my mum or dad or both were there with me for a lot of the time. But what's been really interesting for me, sort of reflecting back, is I've got a family that don't really talk about anything. So, it's not been something that was ever discussed in depth. There was just this, we just get on with things. And I hadn't really realized that until I was much older, that we never really talked about it. And even a couple of years ago, it was the 30th anniversary of my injury. And I was staying at my parents' place, and they didn't even acknowledge it. Like the day before, I was asking Mum, like, have we got any photos? Because I was starting to write some blog posts about my journey. And she's like, oh, what do you want them for? And I told her. She goes, oh, yeah. And then never said anything about it. I didn't really think much of it at the time, but looking back, and maybe it was, I guess I've ended up exactly where I'm meant to be. So, perhaps not having a lot of conversations around that, perhaps could have been part of how I've ended up being able to, just get on with it. I know now that it's not the best way to deal with, dealing with such adversity. But, at the time, it just seemed to work for our family. But again, it was really difficult, just no one talking about it. And sometimes, I've been asked since, like, how did my brother cope? And I feel quite guilty at times, thinking, well, I don't actually really know, because no one really talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could see how, I think recently there's been, especially like with social media and everything being overshared, that we're being told to process our feelings and think about how we feel in certain situations more now than we probably ever have before. And so talking about your mother and your family in that time, you wonder, were they trying to protect you by just saying, like, this is the way it is, let's move on with our life. And now you're looking back saying, well, no, I think I needed to process this. I needed to process this with you guys. It's probably the way you were feeling. And I want to talk about, so you had the days of the darkness after the accident. At what point did you pick yourself up and say, okay, this isn't the way I'm going to live my life? Because I know that's not the way you live your life.
No. And that's the thing. As I said, I think that, perhaps it was for the best for me, that it was just get on with it. But also too, my parents didn't protect me either. So that was something that I think was really beneficial. They just let me have pretty much as normal a teenagehood as my peers did. So, they encouraged me to still go out and go to parties and do all the things that my friends were doing. And so that was, I think, I would have preferred to have the experience I did rather than the other way, where it was like, the bubble wrap and the cotton wool and,
Right.
Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? So I'm pretty lucky in that respect. But yeah, as far as the process of getting out of that rut, it was not until towards the end of like my high school years, so probably around 16, that the first sort of bits of going, look, I realized that getting drunk and getting stoned all the time was not helping me at all. I was getting really foggy, and I just sort of thought, look, that's got to stop. So the first step was, I stopped getting stoned. And that was a positive one. I had a couple of really low points where it was like I really didn't want to be here at all, and that scared me. It was like a couple of those little things, but it was a slow process. But I think the biggest thing for me was getting to the end of my schooling. I got into university. I ended up deferring and not going, but then I got a job. And I had a full-time job straight out of school. I really, liked what I did. I made good friends. I ended up dating someone I worked with. I got my license. I got a car. And I think once I realized that, all of that sort of stuff, I could still do the majority of things that most people did. So that was a big bit. But eventually I got to the point, and like I don't know exactly, when it was on the process, where I realized that I couldn't change what had happened, but I could change how I felt about what happened, and I could change the story I told about what happened, and I had complete control of what came next. And so once I then began to look at that, like I felt my world really open up. And eventually that turned into feeling, genuine and deep gratitude for what had happened. And people think, how the heck can you end up, feeling grateful and positive about ending up a quadriplegic and needing a wheelchair for the rest of your life? But people realize when they spend time with me that I do feel such deep gratitude. And gratitude is such an experience of abundance and openness and possibility and an opportunity. And that was the real transformational thing for me. So then I started to go, I felt this real burning desire to, to see more and do more and give more. And then I felt like I felt like I was here to make a difference. And that's when, I started to say yes to opportunities, and all these opportunities came my way that challenged me. But it just led me on a completely different path that I can say with absolute certainty that I would never have had the experiences I've had now had my life taken the path that I'd intended it to, back then at 12 years old.
Right. Wow. And practicing gratitude. I love how you mentioned that, because there's, life can beat you down and you get in situations not as extreme as yours, but just the smallest things. And you think they're going to completely change the trajectory of your life or the path that you were going in. It's no longer the path that you're in. And it's like you can let that bog you down and discourage you, and you feel like there's no way of getting out of it. And when you're practicing gratitude and thinking about all the things that you can do and that you are grateful for, it can help you through those moments of adversity where you feel like giving up. And so walk us through what are some ways that you can, or that you could educate our listeners on, like, how do you take a second and develop that like gratitude system that you use during those times?
Yes, so gratitude does come up a lot, and that's because it works and it's really powerful. And I tried. It's interesting. My practices around gratitude now actually evolved from it was more of a self-love type of thing. So I started out, and every night as I fell asleep, I actually told myself out loud that I loved myself. And it felt so weird and wrong. And that then it was like, okay, but I'm committed to this process. I want to experiment. I want to see how this feels. And, then eventually that sort of that evolved into, some mantras that I use, because a lot of the time when we hear about gratitude, you hear about keeping a gratitude journal, you hear about, writing down the, 3, 5, 10 things you're grateful for each day. Now, I found that didn't work for me. It felt like a bit of a chore and an obligation, and it wasn't creating the experience of gratitude that I was looking for. So that self-love ritual ended up turning into a mantra that I then use around gratitude. And so when I go to sleep each night, when I wake up in the morning, and then any time during the day where I'm starting to feel, a bit flat, in a rut or stressed, then I actually just stop and take a couple of deep breaths. And I say to myself, thank you for the opportunity to be who I am, where I am, with what I have at this moment in time. It takes like 7 to 9 seconds, and it's just a couple of deep breaths right down into the bottom of your belly, and you're just bringing yourself so into the moment. And with all that, because if you are truly present in the moment, it's not possible to feel depressed because that's about the past, and it's not possible to feel anxious because that's about the future. And so you come into that moment, and thank you for the opportunity to be who I am, where I am, with what I have at this moment in time. It's just so powerful, and it's so, so, so simple. And so, I share that with a lot of people, and that's been something that I've gotten so much feedback just about how much that's helped.
I love that so much. And it needs to be like a tattoo on your arm if it isn't.
No, not quite. But what I've done is like I've got that and a few other mantras. I've printed them on the back of my business card. So,
Yeah.
when I speak and all that sort of stuff, when people buy my books, I pop them in there as a bookmark and, do those type of things as well. And I'm just in the process of actually creating a workshop around gratitude, sort of around, creating your own mantras or building into those type of things. But I guess it's kind of the anti-gratitude stuff that's out
Yeah.
there. But I've spoken to a lot of people that have had a similar experience to me where they felt that the, traditional write down the things you're grateful for every day, like to me, it felt a bit wanky and it just didn't sit right with me. And it didn't create that experience of gratitude. So that works for some people. But I like to just say, look, here's another possibility to explore. And then, it might be both or alternate between them. But main thing is just finding the thing that works for you. And I think that, if people were looking at any, how could they start with resilience? And I'd say start with that practice is the simplest thing that you can do. You've got total control over it. You can do it anywhere, anytime.
And I love how you connect it with being present as well, because that is something that many people struggle with. I do as well, is like, thinking about all of the things in your past, like even just what you may have done that day or yesterday that didn't go right, or all of the things that you're anxious about, because, anxiety is the fear of the future, things that are going to happen or haven't even happened yet. And so really like sitting in that moment of gratitude in the present moment that you're in, I love how you made that connection. That is so important. Now, I want to take this conversation, I want to spin it a little bit, because I know today you help business. So you not only help individuals overcome adversity and become resilient, but you also help business owners. How did you get into business coaching?
Yeah, it was pretty much everything I've done has happened organically. It's not been something that I've intentionally done. I started out just keynote speaking. So, and through the process of that, there have been people that have then come up and asked me, well, sometimes it can be a specific resilience thing because, as as a business owner, that, you're always challenged. There are so many challenges. There's risks. There's the trying to juggle, your things between your family and, your health, your own personal health and mental health, and trying to grow a successful business, trying to manage employees and things like that, which is probably one of the hardest things. Mm-hmm. So over time, then I've been asked to work a bit more deeply on that. And at the moment, I'm in the sort of pre-launch stage of an inner circle program with the Academy of Resilience. So I'm doing weekly calls with people that are growing their businesses. And that's been amazing, just being able to, help them with, the accountability, some strategies around resilience and just strategies around business in general. And, I've sort of grown my own business. And then, when I first started this business, I actually had another business I was growing at the same time with two business partners. So I've sort of done the juggles of all those things. But, and also too, a lot of it has come through, my own personal coaches and mentors. Again, so many times it's people outside of us see things in us that we don't see ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so, it's been really helpful for them to go, you should be coaching people because you've got this talent for it and you kind of just do it in conversation anyway. And so that's how that sort of happened from a business coaching perspective. But also I've had a lot of people over the years that have seen what I've done as far as being a speaker, then publishing a book and then growing a business on the back of that. Then a lot of people will then come and say, well, how did you do what you did? Mm-hmm. And so there's been that element of helping people from I've got a day job, but I've got a message and I want to do something with that. So then it's been able to be, helping them as well. And as I said, it's been kind of organic. It's been a bit ad hoc at times. But this year is when I just sort of gone, okay, no, I really want to intentionally do something with this. So it was first week of January. I ran an online workshop. And on the back of that now, I've, starting to build that, that group of people that are wanting to better themselves and grow their businesses, and then working with them on a weekly basis. And that's been amazing just to be able to see their growth and, get to know people on a deeper basis. And that's the hard thing about being a speaker is that you can spend 40 minutes, an hour in a room full of people and then have a few conversations afterwards and I may never see them again. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of fun to be able to do that. And I learn a lot in the process too.
Oh, I'm sure. And like you said, like being a coach and being able to connect with someone on that personal level and seeing how your expertise and experience can then help them grow and you can be a part of that journey is very rewarding, more so than when you're presenting to 1,000 people and you don't know the true connections and the true impact that you make because you only see them for such a short amount of time. I do want to ask, because I know that fitness was a part of your life before your accident, and then it's now a part of your life. I believe in talking to you previously, you mentioned something about auditioning for a team or playing for a softball. I may be wrong about this. A softball team?
Yeah. Oh, so what had happened was when I first had the accident and I had that 8 weeks flat on my back staring at the ceiling.
Yeah.
Then I actually made a pact with my 12-year-old self that I was never going to play sport again, because I was like, I can't do it like I used to. I don't think I can. If I can't be good at it, I don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. And so, for the most part of many years, I kept that up. I got pushed to try a couple of things over the years. So I tried a couple of things. I had a few tennis lessons and things like that. But I was so embarrassed by how slow and uncoordinated I was. So I was like, no, this was a good decision not to do this. And it wasn't until it was a few days after my 34th birthday. So that was like 22 years after that 12-year-old girl making a pact with herself, that I just got this message from somewhere up there, Universe. And it was so loud that said, Stace, it's time to get fit. And I was like, okay, like this was so strong. And I'm like, whatever you say. And it's funny when you get this clarity, and then all of a sudden the universe kind of conspires to help you make it happen. And a couple of days later, I got an email about a Paralympic talent search, and I thought, oh my goodness, like that would be a good place to go to find something to get fit. So I registered for the event, and a couple of days before the event, I kind of reread the email, and it said, that they were looking for athletes. And I just said to my partner at the time, I said, I'm not an athlete. I'm never going to be an athlete again, so I better not go. And he said, look, just go. You never know what might come of it. And so if I show up for something, I always give 100%. So I showed up to this talent search, and it was like most of the people there were like kids. And so I felt so old, but I thought, okay, I'm here. Let's see what I can do. And so they had all these different sports set up. So I just made my way around and chatted to all the coaches, and I tried all the things that I thought that I could at least have a go at. And, to my complete surprise, like every single one of those coaches had said, you could, this is something you could pursue if you wanted to. And I still didn't think much of it other than, oh, look, I could, I could get fit doing this.
Right.
And it wasn't until a few weeks later, and I got a letter in the mail from the Paralympic Committee that said that I showed a lot of the physical attributes to be a potential Paralympian if I chose to pursue it. And I just sat there staring at that letter for so long going, oh my gosh, I've just spent the last 22 years not even having a crack because I didn't think I was good enough. And here I was at 34. I hadn't even been in a gym in all of that time or anything. Like I didn't do anything for my fitness. And all of my old competitive instincts just went bam. And it was like, okay, I got to do something with this. So I went through and I sort of looked at all the different sports I tried. And then I ended up settling on throwing discus of all things. Yeah, so it ended up being discus. And I ended up throwing left-handed, even though I'm right-handed, because I can't use my fingers on my right hand, so I couldn't even hold things properly. So I threw left-handed. It was the craziest thing. I then took this discus home, and then I went and saw a local physio who did not know me. He treated my partner earlier, and I went in and I told him of my crazy plans to go to the Paralympics and represent Australia throwing discus left-handed. And he completely, and I said, where do I start? And he just completely bought into me. And he said, then they offered to sponsor me. So they gave me free physio and free gym. And then I found out later he was actually the physio for the State Sports Institute as well. And so it's one of these things, I think, for your listeners as well, is that if you have something that might seem a little bit crazy or something out there, it's actually sharing it with people. And it's often the people that we don't even know, because sometimes the people that are closest to us can be the most negative, but sometimes it's the people in that, periphery, that when you talk about your dreams and you talk about your goals, then you can find those people that will back you. And so, I went through a process of having to, get a classification. That went really badly. And then, so I won a state title. I won a silver medal at the national championships, but I was never going to be, just because of the classification that I was given, I was never going to be able to compete internationally, which is what I wanted to do. So I made the switch to track racing. I ended up being the first woman in Australia ever to compete in my classification for track racing. And, so I did that for a few years, had, some, crazy experiences with that. And, so I did want to qualify for the Paralympics in Rio, then Tokyo. But it was actually in 2019, I was actually in the States, and I was in a park in Nashville, and I was watching a helicopter land on the roof of the hospital, and it just took me back to being 12 years old and being in a helicopter being landed on the roof of a hospital. And I had just this most profound moment where I imagined my 12-year-old self seeing me there 29 years later and never imagining what I could have done with my life. And then I realized in that moment that I couldn't be an elite athlete and do what I'm doing now. And I realized that what I do now in, talking about resilience and helping others then be the best in their lives no matter what goes wrong, I realized that was what I needed to do. So I let go of that, even though I had talked about it for years and I had sponsors and I did all that sort of stuff. And once I let go of that, then I've just had this exponential growth in myself personally, and also in my business, and how I can help others. And and now this year, like, my word for the year is service, and that's my whole thing now is how can I just be of best service to others. And I'm like, wow, 32 years later, after thinking that my life was over, here I am with the greatest opportunity that I could ever have. And again, even a deeper gratitude for the adversity I've had over the years, and then being able to then share that with others and have conversations like we're having today.
That story gives me chills. Just when you said, you had said you're never going to do no fitness ever again. Like you weren't an athlete anymore. And then you go and show up and they're like, wow, look at the potential that you have 20 years later. I mean, that is truly amazing. And you are an athlete. You were, and you always will be.
Thank you.
Truly amazing. And there have been clients at Fit Body Bootcamp that they come to us and they say, oh, I used to be an athlete. I used to be fit. And they're so stuck on the I used to be, and not thinking about what they could continue to be or what they could try to regain. And they're so focused on the setbacks that they've had or the current state that they're in, that they're not seeing that they still have those athletic abilities. They still have the ability to do what they did. It might not look the same, might not feel the same, of course, years later, but they can still do it. And it's hard to overcome that. Mentally, it's more mental than it is physical. It's just telling yourself that you still have the ability to do the physical activity and to play the sport that you played. So that's truly amazing that you had that opportunity and that you gave in to that sign from the universe that day and then received that email. It's just incredible.
Yeah. And I agree with you. It is mental. And, for me, it just reignited it actually gave me a passion for fitness that I never had before. Even now, I'm 44, and I'm still this year I've been working intensely with a physiotherapist just to improve my flexibility. I've been exploring with my boyfriend. He has a small gym that he does, and so I do some boxing and stuff with him. I'm doing weights. I'm trying to again even at 44, and I'm sort of like, what else? What can I do with this body of mine? Even though it's been 32 years since I had my accident, so it's never too late. There's always a way to do it. The hardest part's getting started.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Well, Stacey, I have gotten so much value from this just chat with you and learning about your story. And thank you for sharing everything that you shared today. I did want to ask, where can our listeners learn more about you and your business coaching and then your book? Where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, if you just pop my name into Google, so you'll find plenty of stuff there. But I'm as far as the social platforms go, I'm most active on Instagram and LinkedIn. So I absolutely welcome anyone to connect with me. Send me a DM. I look after all my own stuff, and I love having conversations with people that have listened to a podcast, just to see what resonated with them and what questions they have. And also, if anyone would like to read my book, How to Be Resilient, there's actually a free download at howtoberesilient.com.au for the Australia. Or if you want the hard copy, then you can grab one online at any of your favorite bookstores.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for that. And so one question that I ask all of my guests on Beyond the Scale is, on Beyond the Scale, we talk about health and fitness and mindset, but that our life is not defined by that number on the scale, that it's so much more than that. And so I do want to ask you, what does living a life beyond the scale mean to you?
To me, it resonates as far as there's not a single measure of success. I think that in our minds, often we go, okay, we're aiming for one particular outcome. But to me, the process is far more important than the outcome. Ultimately, we can't control an outcome, but we can control what we do every single day. So if you can go, okay, ultimately, I want to get to a certain place. And to me, it's not about the actual number. It's about what do you want to experience overall? Like, what is it that you want to experience? And then what can you do each and every day that, if you do that consistently, is going to lead to you having that experience? That's what Beyond the Scale means to me.
I love that so much. And your outcome or your goal can also evolve during that process. And so I think that's very important to note, because I say this all the time, like the goals that I had 5 years ago don't match the goals that I have today. They've evolved, and I've enjoyed the journey. During the process and the journey, it's like I've learned so much and grown so much. And I realize, okay, what I wanted back then is not what I want now. And that's okay, as long as you're enjoying the process.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And sometimes people think that that they're quitting or something like that. And that's when I gave away that Paralympic dream, it wasn't quitting. It was just letting go of something that no longer served me. And as long as we are growing and evolving and doing that every day, then if our goals aren't changing, then we're not really growing. So I think it's encouraging that, and also not just being focused on a single goal, because otherwise you get to that point and it can be a complete anticlimax. It's like, I've worked this hard, I've got this, and now what?
Right. Exactly. Well, Stacey, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Scale today. For all of our listeners, make sure that you subscribe to our channel on YouTube, comment with your biggest takeaways, and then share with all of your friends. And we will see you again soon.